silence does speak volumes at times when you're playing a game, where somebody's just letting the gameplay and the mechanics speak for themselves.
But the approach here is not necessarily very music heavy, but it's more about trying to create this like a whole audiovisual experience.
So Badland, right? It went on to win like a bunch of awards. I mean, this game it had some pretty impressive staying power once it released.
It's really interesting because I didn't put any pressure on how well this should succeed. I think the goal was just releasing a game on App Store and get enough money of that and maybe make another game. But I think it was early on very clear that Apple was very much into it. When we first announced the game in 2012, we immediately got an Apple contact. And we understand immediately how important this is. There is really no like plan B that what if Apple doesn't feature your game, what then? Yeah. Well, then you're dead basically. And what we did was that we immediately went to London to them and gave them the iPad and talked about the game. And I think it was really a starting point for like a really good relationship with Apple. And when we released the game, we were featured as an editor's choice. We had a very good launch. It won the Apple Design Award. And at the end of the year, it was iPad Game of the Year. And as I said before, it was crazy that we were nominated as an action game with Grand Theft Auto 5.
Right, yeah.
But I think everything went really well with Badland back then. And back then, the free-to-play model was already like rushing into mobile. And Badland was a premium game you played once and so on. So making a game with that model and making a success that it was like one of those last moments with Badland and with its sequel 2 years later. I think Apple has Apple Arcade currently. And I think the Apple Arcade is the similar type of goal if you have a premium game. Then there's like Netflix games also, so there are probably more opportunities, but I think the key is still to have a good relationship with Apple, get their attention and go from there really. But overall, the mobile gaming industry, if I think about, I don't have experience about free to play, but I have experience about releasing a premium game. It has changed a lot, but there still is possibilities there, and I think mainly because of Apple Arcade.
You mentioned trailers, so you and I at first when we linked up and we started talking about this game, you had talked about the first cut of this trailer and how you released it and how it had initially gone, and then you had to kind of go back and take a closer look at it. Walk me through that one really quick, break that down for me.
This is actually very educational, of course painful story also, but I think the announcement trailer was very important, and I thought that we should put everything we have, every cool thing that we have into that, and I started making that something like 7 months before the announcement. I started very early on designing the shots, and overall I think the trailer is really good, but it's actually really bad. And the idea is that the way I made the trailer is that every night that I made it, I went to my TV room and the home theater and I watched what I've done for the day and was always like super happy that this looks so cool and this is great and so on. But then what happened was that we announced the project and I contacted as many news sites as possible and journalists and so on, and very few answered, and there was not much of anything going on. Also, trailer didn't got much traction, and I felt really like depressed, and I really had to like get into what led to this. And pretty quickly, it was very clear that the trailer needs to be something that if you look at in your mobile phone, you should immediately see what's cool in this game. It took like maybe 20-30 seconds to really get to the point, because the trailer was all about showing everything cool we have. And I made the recut like next morning. Recutting took like less than 30 minutes. The video was 30 to 40 seconds, and I downloaded that to Reddit. And that was like the first like really good thing that happened, because it exploded. It went to our wall. It got like 1.5 million views in less than 3 hours, and it basically got us thousands of wish lists and so on. And I think one of the key things was that it's not about how much work you do or how beautiful your work is. It's all about making the right moves. Well, you just have to understand what you are trying to say.
I saw analytics for YouTube a couple months back, and they were saying that most people drop off your video in the first, I think it was 2 to 5 seconds, if they don't like get to your point and then start.
Like you said about those first 2-3 seconds, when I recut the Reddit trailer, the first cut is something that's not currently in the game even. It's a character using the core mechanic, the swapping mechanic, but there's is a black background because I realized that I could make much prettier background. But if people just see it rapidly on their mobile phone, they doesn't necessarily focus on the most
they gotta like decipher
important aspects, which are the character and his mechanic. But when the character is bright, whatever he does is like bright explosions and stuff like that, making the swap effect, and everything is black on the background. It's super precise what's happening there. But it sort of feels like cheating in a way that it's so calculated, and it's not even a spot you're going to put in a game just like that. Because I have the spot in the game currently, but it has a beautiful background in it. So I sort of cheated in a way, but it's not like it's the most horrible sin you can imagine. But still, you need to really think about when marketing a game, what's like the key issue, what's the one key component you really want to show, and then make it as clear as possible.
To your point, like where you're saying, you took that black background to key in on on what's going on, right? And when you're actually in the game, there would be a background there. I think to a similar degree, but in a completely different world, you have like AAA games where you always see like the cinematic trailers, right? And it's not really gameplay usually, it's more just like the action sequences, and like, people always will comment, they'll be like, yeah, but this isn't like gameplay. They'll rip into it because of that. But ultimately, I think, from a marketing standpoint, you show that cinematic trailer and those like action sequences for the exact same reasons, right? You're trying to suck players in, keep them engaged, make them think about it. I feel like the majority of developers do kind of do something similar, and it's less about, tricking the player, and it's more about like just keeping them engaged and keeping their game in the back of that player's mind, because ultimately when you're in the game, you expect it to have a background, right? You expect an action game not to be all cinematic. Like there's gameplay elements to it. You understand what they're doing, and you understand once you're in the game it's going to be different. Now, a decade ago, maybe that wasn't the case, but I think nowadays people understand that when they're like watching trailers versus playing games. It's just part of the marketing nowadays.
Yeah, and it's like, if I think about when they first announced Fallout 3, there was this zooming out from the radio, and I mean the game is not about stuff like that, but immediately you were immediately there.
But talking about social media, right? So with your game specifically, you said you do it on Reddit, and you're using Twitter and TikTok, stuff like that. What audiences have proven to be like the most engaged with your title, and how have you kind of leaned into that a little bit with this game?
Well, that's a tricky question. I think pixel art is definitely something that, like, besides the gaming and the game mechanics, and that pixel art community is something that I've been leaning more and more towards. And I think it's also important that, especially in Twitter, you notice that indie gamers promote their games to other indie devs, and it's I think it's at the beginning it's a good way to get some of that holding and get some reach and followers and so on. But I think at some point you need to transform that to more generic audience and maybe find more people there, because there's only so much indie devs out there, but there's actually more normal people out there. So you should really try to find some of those things. For example, in Bionic Bay, I've been really hard trying to think what sort of traits are something that would be like generally appealing to masses, rather than just for people who are interested in platformers or stuff like that. And I think through art and pixel art, that's definitely one way to reach people. But then there's also ways to make posts about game mechanics that are more like easily understandable to everyone. For example, I had this post where we have this button in a game where I can trip the character whenever I want, make him a ragdoll, and I made a post about it, that what if we had this like random tripping, character can actually trip at any moment in the game, not realized, and it was probably my most popular Twitter post ever. It got like maybe 300k impressions or something like that. But I think that was a great learning experience in a way that post didn't have like any like unique game idea or something like that. It also wasn't like outstandingly pretty or beautiful or something like that, but it was funny in a way. So they are not like, if you try to promote the game, they are not like one singular rules that you must follow.
It is a good point when you talk about something like a video on Reels that just like it has 400 and 600 views and then it explodes. I think TikTok is something similar, where it's like you have tons and tons of views, but the problem I think that content creators creators and developers have with TikTok is you have all these views, but you don't have the analytics to back that up. So you don't really know where they are or how they're engaging or anything like that. So it's just like, it's awesome. It's exposure, and exposure is always good, but you don't have the back end of that, which is a struggle for you when you're trying to like leverage your title and give it to the audiences who want to see it, because you don't know who that audience was and you don't know who wanted to see it, which is unfortunate. When you're creating this game from an artistic standpoint, how do you separate Bionic Bay from the thousands of other platforms that are out there?
I don't have like lots of strict rules, but for Bionic Bay, there are a few traits that I try to follow. And obviously, what is the use of light and shadow in a way I don't think many games have done, in a way that the character is constantly going in or out of the shadows. And it sort of makes this interesting dynamic throughout the game. One of the things that almost every platformer has is they are made with these 90 degrees angles or 45 degrees angles. And I try to avoid that in a way that I want levels to feel like organic and just more interesting. With Bionic Bay, I have this idea of this decaying ancient world where everything is a little bit broken and so on, because it just looks more beautiful that way, to me at least. Now someone will play Bionic Bay and notice that there are 90 degree angles. Of course there are, because you need those in many of those situations, but the thing is that I try to avoid them, and I try to make the world feel as organic as possible.
You mentioned when you were making the initial trailer that you hadn't really gotten any sound design into your game at that point. You had to kind of physically create that for that specific trailer. As you're getting to the point you're at now, how important do you see sound design as being in this game? Because when I think of like visually beautiful platformers, instantly things that come to mind for me are also visually beautiful platformers that have beautiful soundtracks, or not even platforms, right? Like just in general, like games. You think of Witcher's, soundtrack, which is beautiful. You think of Ori's soundtrack, which is incredible. Like these like impactful, engaging, emotional soundtracks. Not every visually beautiful game has that, obviously. Each one, they approach things differently. But for you, is something like that in the cards for Bionic Bay? Is that something you've thought about? Or how do you approach the sound design and then kind of the composition, the musical composition outside of that?
I think it's very important that you actually feel that you exist in whatever game world you are. To me, like the constant soundtrack on the background is something that I really don't like too much.
I see.
I think if there's music, it should be like a special situation. It really should have like a meaning. One of my favorite games is the first Tomb Raider from '96. It's actually used music very interesting way, in a way that I remember when I started playing it, you're in like Nepal or something like that, and you enter this cave and there's only environmental sounds. And then when Lara Croft comes into like some interesting place, there's like a temple or something like that, you get some subtle composition of violin or something like that. And I thought when it actually happens, it means something, and it never feels like it's just on the background or so on. So I think the same approach is used here, that almost all the sounds are environmental sounds, but every once in a while you need to break that. You need to get player into this like whatever emotional state you want. Then I think music becomes more important and so on.
Yeah.
But Bionic Bay won't be like a music heavy game in that sense, that there would be like a theme to every level and you would hear that on the background and so on. But we have a sound designer from Chile who has been great, and he's basically, he understands what I'm trying to do here, but I can see that he would like there to be more music, and I understand that completely. But the approach here is not necessarily very music heavy, but it's more about trying to create this like a whole audiovisual experience and use music when it really matters.
I do think you do have a point where like silence does speak volumes at times when you're playing a game and you're like locked in on the moment and you feel engaged, where somebody's just letting the gameplay and the mechanics speak for themselves. But another hurdle that you have to overcome with this game, which arguably when I see your game could potentially be one of the biggest hurdles for you, is your character size, because the character in the game is smaller, which it is something unique to your game, so it has positives. But then when you think about playing this game on like Steam Deck, or you think about playing it on other PC handheld platforms, or as you mentioned when you're watching a trailer for the game, the character is smaller. So how do you approach that specifically?
That's also something that when I make the game and play the game, it's never an issue. But I noticed also when I started posting clips online and so on, and people people see them with their mobile phones, the character is very small. So I need to tailor every social media post in a way that I have camera closer, or I do zooms out where people first see the character and then we see the whole thing and so on. And it's funny, it's actually been affecting my way of doing the levels also. When implementing a core mechanic into our game, the swapping mechanic, it's very much useful to have as much room as possible for a mechanic like that. If you would have camera very close, it would be harder to do stuff because you don't see where the attack object is and you constantly want to see the object you're going to swap. So in that sense, it's something that looks appealing, looks unique, but it's also mechanically, it's crucial. I think the biggest issue is not the character size, it's the color of the character and what's on the background of it. And I think that's on level design. So it's the clarity of the character is more about level design and decoration than it's actually the fact that it's small. And the biggest issue is not when you play the game, is when you actually promote the game. That's when I need to really tailor the footage so that people actually see it no matter what. Many have said that one of the key things that they like about Bionic Bay is the fluid character. And I think that it is about physics, it is about animations, but it is also about this a bit weird combination of camera a bit further than you used to and character a bit tinier than you have used to. And this is actually also one of those calculated things in the sense that how do we separate our game from other games?
As you're creating a game like this from a technical standpoint, walk me through the development style you chose and then how that impacted you specifically as the artist and the overall abilities and capabilities really within your game as you made it.
In Bionic Bay, we have basically a 3D scene where we have 2D planes. So there's no 3D models or anything like that, but it's a 3-dimensional scene where I can freely set up the depth of the assets and so on. So I think that gives you enough freedom to do visually basically anything. We have this standalone editor. The game is made in Unity, but we have a standalone editor which I make the levels with. And basically the whole project started in a way that I documented what we need for an editor to make like a crazy good platformer game. I documented the features for the programmers and it took like maybe 6 months or something like that to get the first version of that editor, which had like the basic stuff in it. You have this object selector where you can choose any object, you can scale them, rotate them, copy them. And basically we started from there, adding features in it. And now we have lasers and teleports and crazy stuff over there that we can do whatever comes into mind. But I think the most like crucial tools in our editor are something that I never actually have had in a level editor, were the visual tools that we can basically do a lot with. It's not like it's a Photoshop in a level editor, but it's almost like that. We can really adjust basically all the assets as much as we want. We can use them as masks. We can animate them, adjust colors, stuff like that. There are a bunch of tools for me to basically use the level editor as an image editor, almost like a Photoshop type of tool. So this editor really has like a great combination of tools that I can do mechanically, like gameplay ideas, which are of course physics-based ideas in a physics-based world. But then there's the other side, which is purely decorating it as pretty as possible. Also, Unity has probably all of those already there in Unity, but the idea for make a unique editor was that we have only the necessary tools, and we can also make custom tools, and we can also make tools that are specific for this game. And then just push play and test, and then go back to editor mode and make the edits and just test it as effectively as possible.
We're getting to the end of 2023 right now. What does next year look like for you, and what kind of like pillars do you have laid out that this game is going to be hitting as we progress?
Well, I think we're in great position in a way that most of the editor itself is like, well, it's never quite ready because you obviously get new ideas and so on, but the fundamentals are there. So it's very effective tool to make levels. We have 3 words or sections in Bionic Bay and around 20 levels, and I've just recently been finishing making the art style and art assets for the last world. So I'll be starting making those levels in this fall, and we have lots of new features planned there. So it's I feel like every time when I start making this new world, I almost feel like I'm starting at making a sequel for Bionic Bay, because every time I'm little bit more experienced, assets are a little bit better. Then I look at the old assets and I'm like, do I need to make this again? But the idea is that basically, I think it's important that every one of those sections feel like fresh and unique, that you could basically build a whole game around one of those sections. But when you have 3 separate sections which are pretty unique, we have a pretty unique game also. But the idea is that we're starting to make the last section this fall, and we also have plans for our online mode in the game. Whatever that will be, we have to see it. But already when we released the demo in Next West, there was lots of people who really liked the game in a sense that they would really like to do speed running with it. And it's true, because it's not like, if you think about a game like Super Mario or something like that, and then you have a physics-based game, there's so much more depth in that kind of world. It can also be annoying because it's never quite the same, but it actually can be like something really interesting. If I think about making like speedrun versions of those levels or parts of those levels. And I think with the combination of these 2 things, we have really like a special platformer. I think always if something is unique, you're afraid maybe this is like too unique and goes too weird, and there isn't a game like this because no one wants a game like this. But yeah, we are still pretty confident, especially after the release of the demo, that we have something people actually enjoy. We are in very good position currently, in a way that we know that we have something that works. Now just let's finish it, let's polish it, let's add content into it, and that's basically our next year.